It's lucky if he serves someone here.
Exactly, I can understand.
How are you? How are you? Well, good. How was your spring break? Yeah. Did you? That's good. That's horrible talking about
Rest in my brain.
Yeah, that's right.
That's what we do, get reoriented with our house.
Hey, how are you?
Sure.
I'm good.
Ice that I
What did you find the ice?
must have been on the bottom step of the rack. So she fell with her hands like that. And of course, it was right when they were leaving to line up. Line up is always everybody's always watching the lineup and getting line up. And that's always when all the accidents happen. So she was fine. She actually didn't even scrape herself. But Pretty good for. Looks hard to What do you think of that? I mean, I read it. I love it. It's a little young for
Thank you for coming to the Sunny Hills Tea House this morning. I am David, and the rest of our class is... We invited you here today to help us celebrate the history of Sanford and to remember the Sunny Hills Tea House, which was run by students and faculty for 3 summers in the 1930s. All food that was served came from the school farm and was made by students.
In the same way, Sanford students are running our tea house, and the 3rd grade students have prepared a terrific presentation for you. Please feel free to ask your server if you have any questions about the menu or if you need anything. We would love to make your dining experience enjoyable.
As you know, we have been researching the history of Sanford School through studying the buildings, reading lots of information, and interviewing people who have been at Sanford 20 years or longer.
This timeline was created from the research we did this winter. One thing that made our research very easy is that so many people at Sanford have been here over 20 years came to talk to us about how Sanford has changed over the years. Special thanks to Miss Perkins, Miss Samoninsky, Mr. Humphreys, Miss Reagan, Miss Rasmus, Miss Cope, and Jackie Pitts, who are not present today, for their excellent presentations. Also, we would like to welcome Miss Yates, Mr. Waterman, and Miss Moore for joining us today. We would like to share some of our interesting facts that we learned. Lily, Bella, Brighton, and Finley will be going to the 1930s.
Welcome to the 1930s. There are many important dates throughout this decade. In 1916, Sanford Solon died at the age of 10, and Sanford Hall was named after him. In 1929, the Solon family bought Pine Glen Farm, and the first day of Sunny Hill School was on September 24th, 1930. In 1932, a junior high was added to the school. In 1934, they remodeled the old barns for classrooms and the dormitory. The year 1937 was first year there was a graduating class. It had 3 girls and 4 boys in the class. In 1939, the school got its first 2 athletic fields. There are many important buildings at Sanford. Sanford Hall was the first building on Sunny Hills campus. Did you know that Sanford Hall is in the shape of a cross? The old bar next to Quigley Hall is remodeled to include classrooms and a dormitory, as I mentioned. Now we know that's DNA. In the 30s, there was no Appleby Gym or Geifel Gym. Hebb Hall was named after Miss Hebb because her mother saw it. Went to Miss Hebb's school in downtown Wilmington. Miss Hebb was a favorite teacher. Do you want to learn about life on campus in the 1930s? Life on campus was different from what it is now. Sanford was a boarding school then, and wood was cut to make firewood and burn in the fireplaces, or heat throughout campus. There were lots of chores for the students to do, like laundry, mending, cooking, picking, and packing apples, and much more. You had to be part of the working farm here on campus. The boarding students had to feed the cows at 5 a.m. and 5 p.m. There were fun field day events, but much different from today. In school, girls had to follow the dress code and wear dresses and skirts. They were not allowed to wear pants. This would not be good for me. All girls had to play basketball and tennis. Summer camp was only for lower school students. All students had to speak French during meals. The sports teams were tennis, field hockey, football, and basketball. Field hockey was only for girls, and football was only for boys. The Sunny Hills faculty in the 1930s was awesome, although it was very small. At the time, Eleanor Quigley Sullivan, known as Mother Sullivan, was head of school. Mother Sullivan and Elsie Pond were first faculty members, but in the late 1930s, faculty grew to 11 people. Elsie Pond still worked here then. In 1916, Sanford Sullivan died. In honor of his death, the first building at Sunny Hills was named after him. The building was called Sanford Hall. Mother Sullivan was honored too when she died.
Here are some interesting facts about Sanford in the 1930s. When our school opened on September 24th, there were 7 children who attended to our school. There were 3 girls and 4 boys. Mother Son was the founder of this school, and I heard Mother Son was very nice. The Son's son, Sanford, passed away at the age of 10, and the school was named after him. All students wore uniforms, even in the summer. In 1932, 7th and 8th grades were added to the school. In 1937, the first class graduated with 3 girls and 4 boys. Bill Son, Mother Son's oldest son, coached the first football team. Sanford Hall was the first building, and all the classes started there. The Alumni Association was in 1937. In the 1930s, Quigley Hall was used for dormitories. The pine tree was, and still is, our school logo, and it's awesome. Field Day was held in the 1930s and is said to have been very fun. An old wishing well in Tropical Valley was a source of water to Stephen Hall. Thank you for listening to the 1930s. Do you want to learn about Sanford through the 40s? This paragraph is about Sanford's important dates and buildings. In 1940, Sanford was very small. Our school only had about 100 students and 11 staff members. Also in 1940, Sanford had graduated 3 classes and had 25 alumni. In the 1940s, Elizabeth Albright taught Spanish. That's who our building is named after. Also, 1940 was our Sanford's 10th anniversary as a school. In 1942, there was horses and ponies on campus. In 1943, the Kenneth D. Jones Memorial Chapel was completed. Kenneth D. Jones was a teacher at Sanford who died at war serving our country. Some sad news in this decade was that Father Solomon passed away. In 1943, Maureen Solomon, Mother Solomon's youngest daughter, graduated. Also in 1945, Phil Solomon's, Mother Solomon's youngest son, graduated. Next, in 1943, the yearbook was dedicated to Betty Albright. In 1948, Sanford won its first athletic championship. Last but not least, the students started building Gable Gym. Now we are going to talk about what buildings were built. In 1940, Stewart Cottage was built for the faculty to live in. Next, in the 1940s, the new barn was built for the horses on campus. Also in the 1940s, Stephen Bay turned into classrooms. The Alumni House was built in the 1940s too. In 1940, the craft room was built and the dining hall was too. In 1941, the Pine House was built, also for the faculty. Next, Western Cottage was built in 1942. It was used as a boys' residence during the 40s. During the 60s, it was used as a kindergarten. Also in 1942, a ranch shed was built for the Sawyer family to live in. In 1949, the shed was built. Last but not least, the students laid the bricks to begin construction of Gable Gym, Sanford's first gym in 1949.
Sanford life on campus during the 1940s was really exciting. Sanford's campus was larger than it is now. It was mostly a farm at that time. If you were a boarding student that lived on campus, you had to do small chores like making a bed and working on a farm. Classes had up to 5, 6, or 12 students in them. Now we have classes with 12 to 16 students in them. If you were a girl in the 1940s, the sports you could play were field hockey, softball, and lacrosse. If you were a boy, you could play football, baseball, and run track. Basketball was played in the barn. Now boys can play baseball, basketball, and run track, but there's no football. In the 1940s, teachers liked to be called by their first names. Now teachers like to be called by their last names. I think life on campus in the 40s rocked.
During the 1940s, the teachers at Sanford were great. Mother Son was the first head of school. In the 1940s, Mother Son changed our upper school name into Sanford Preparatory School. Eleanor Q. Son was the daughter of Mother Son, and she became an upper school teacher. Phil Son was the son of Mother Son, and Nancy Son was another daughter. Nancy Son became a teacher too. Kenneth D. Jones was honored with a chapel in Chapel Valley. Gable Gym was named after Ashton T. Gable. He was a student who graduated and volunteered to fight in World War II. He died protecting our country.
This paragraph is about interesting facts. So first, Sanford was the first school in Delaware to teach Spanish. The teachers back then wrote most of the plays and musicals that were performed. Also, plays were performed in Stephen May, Gable, and the amphitheater. Parents of boarding students from other countries came to Sanford looking for a safe place for their kids. There was a school nurse who lived on campus. During this time, Nancy Solomon played the bugle every morning to wake everyone up on campus. Coal fires were stoked at buildings at 3 a.m. so the buildings would be warm at 8 a.m. Weekend activities and chores were Bible studies and playing. Older children went to the movies in Wilmington. Kearney Hall was named after Donald Kearney, who was an upper school teacher. Also, Kidder Hall was named after Calvin Kidder. There was also a walnut valley named for all the long walnut trees on campus. In 1940, the War Memorial was built in the middle of campus to honor Sanford teachers, students, and alumni who died at war. There were graduates representatives from 50 2 different countries. May Day included boys dancing with swords. The Sunny Hills tuition was $1,000 a year. Female students helped coach when the war was going on. Thank you for coming and letting us share with you information about the 40s. Here are some important dates about the 1950s. The new kitchen and bedroom were remodeled. Jackie Pitts started teaching upper school math. The swimming pool was built. In 1951, the senior class play was Mary Rose. The faculty rooms were remodeled in 1956. Let me tell you about the buildings that were built in the 1950s. The quad was built, and the stone stairs and stone bridge in the Chapel Valley was built too. Albright Hall was built by the boarding students. Albright Hall is where our third grade classroom is now. The library was built by the class of 1957. The Memorial Chapel was built in honor of Ashton T.
This paragraph is about life on campus in the 50s. The students stored apples from an apple cellar. Many yummy desserts were made from the apples grown on campus. Sanford was a boarding school, and the students had a lot of chores and different classes to do, like typing class. There were 3 new athletic fields because of Route 41 was made, and the contractor needed a place to put all the dirt from the new road. Lucky for us, there were many clubs in the mid-50s. A few were the science club and the debating club. The first band and orchestra was started by Professor Wanderer. And can you believe that there were no TVs on campus? There was a large chicken coop that was made into an art building where the students did weaving and pottery. There was a girls and boys basketball and lacrosse team. The girls also had a field hockey team, and the boys had a track and football team too.
The faculty members in this decade were awesome. Being the head of the school is very important. The 2 awesome heads in the 1950s were Ellen Q. Son and Nancy C. Son. Miss Pitts graduated from Sanford and came back to teach math. Jackie Pitts laid some bricks for Albright Hall as a student, and she started working here in 1959. She still works here to this day. Betty Albright was the Spanish teacher. Donald Perning was the English teacher and also taught social studies. Marnie Son was the typing teacher, and Yanko Siner was the woodshop teacher. Jackie Pitts was also a faculty member back then and now.
There are so many interesting facts about the 1950s. In the 1950s, Marie and Son taught 1st, 2nd, and 6th grade. There were several orchards of apple trees and an apple cellar on campus also. Students could pick apples whenever they wanted. When they built Geipel's gym, the students and faculty had a competition to see who could lay the most bricks on the walls. Betty Albright was honored for Albright Hall. In Albright, Jackie Pitts built a whole wall of bricks. Each senior class went on a trip to Washington, D.C. during their last year at Sanford. There were no TV sets on campus during the 1950s. There were 21 faculty members and 160 students at this time. Thank you for listening to our presentation. I hope you liked it.
Sanford in the 1960s was incredible. There were a lot of important dates and buildings built in the 1960s. In 1961, the first girls' athletic field was built. The DuPont Library and Purdy Hall were built in 1962. In In 1963, Mercer Cottage was built and Mrs. Reynolds started as a student at Sanford School. When 1963 came, Kidder Hall was built, named after Calvin Kidder, who was an honored teacher. More classroom extensions were added to Sanford Hall in 1963. In 1966, another classroom renovation happened at Hebb Hall. In 1967, Appleby Gym was built and brought this. Appleby Gym was built and named after Constance Appleby, a famous field hockey coach who brought the sport to the United States. Most buildings were built by students. 3 tennis courts were made in this year also. Wilson Hall was built in 1968 and the Math Science Center was built in 1969. There was a huge building growth in the 1960s.
This is about life on campus in the 1960s. If you were to live at Sanford in the 60s, it would probably be fun. Here's what it'd be like. Well, one of the changes... Wait, excuse me. Sorry, getting over a cold. Well, one of the changes you would see is lots of building growth, like the construction of Kidder Hall and Appleby Gym. There were lots of horses... Wait. There are lots of fields and horses which roamed the fields where lacrosse fields are now. Students took horseback riding as part of their PE time. Yay! We're going to ride the chicken coop! Believe it or not, it's true. In the 1960s, they had art classes in the chicken coop. Laurel School was in Hebb Hall, where our art classes are now. In the late 60s, there were mostly day students and buses took kindergartners to dismissal each day. And yes, they did have a dress code. The uniforms for girls were tart and plaid. Also, the 5th to 8th graders were in Albright Hall, which is where our classroom is now. Only 7th to 12th graders could board. Bye. Well, not bye.
Late in the 60s, there were mostly day students. Only students in grades 7 to 12 could board. 3 no athletes fields were built. Tennis courts and a riding paddock were made too. Horses roamed the fields. Art was in the chicken coop. In 1968, Sanford had their first radio station. School chores, including cleaning the dining room and dormitory, taking care of horses, working in the library, raking leaves, shoveling snow, and washing cars.
There are lots of interesting facts about the 1960s. There were 2 ponds and 4 athletic fields on campus. There were 9 buses that brought kids to school and took them home each day. There were only 10 board members and 30 staff that helped on campus and 33 faculty members. There were 11 horses that students rode. There were also 30 buildings and 100 acres of land that the school owned. The school had 342 students who came to Sanford and 6,000 books for the libraries. The school had become modernized in the 1960s.
You want to learn about Sanford in the 1970s? This part is going to be about buildings and important dates. Nancy Song was the head of school in 1970. Rodney Beach was the head of school from 1974 to 1975. Then Bruce Carlson took over in 1975. 1970 was the end of football because of the lack of interest. In 1970, Sanford celebrated its 40th anniversary. The townhouse was built as part of the middle school. Dormitories and faculty housing was on the left side of the middle school. Did you know that Albright was heated by another building? Heating pipes were connected to another building. First grade was in the basement of Hebb Hall, which is an art building now. They began their day by saying the pledge, reading poems, singing songs, and hearing the news of the day. You couldn't see many of the buildings if you were driving because of the pine trees on campus. There were 12 houses on campus for teachers to live in. Mrs. Stafford lives on campus too. Sanford owned 175 acres, and on the acres there were 34 buildings in the 70s.
on campus in the 70s was amazing. There were no school uniforms in the 70s. The music program with voice training started in 1972. Older students could take writing lessons in this decade. There were girl-only get-togethers at this time. The sports that boys participated in were soccer, football, and wrestling. For girls, the sports were lacrosse, tennis, and basketball. People wrote a lot of poetry in the 70s in writing classes and painted portraits using oil paints during art class.
All Sanford headmasters and teachers in the 70s were amazing. Nancy Solon stopped being headmaster in 1974. And then Rodney Beach was the headmaster from 1974 to 1975. After that, Bruce Carlson took over as head for the next 5 years. Ann Harvey started as the head of lower school during the 70s. In 1977, Mr. Mayo started teaching typing and PE. In 1979, Mrs. O'Regan became the art teacher. One of the teachers honored in 1976 was Reverend Carl S. Bernsey. Mr. Bernsey was a great counselor teacher, ordained minister, and part of the drama program.
A lot of interesting things happened in the 1970s. This is all about it. On campus, the horses needed a lot of new things. People added a new barn, new stables, and even new pastures. Everything for the horses were built where the maintenance building and Sanford Ridge are now. Also, where the middle school playground is, there used to be a riding ring. Chapel Valley was flooded with trails for the children that rode. Guess what? There was a bell tour that went to Europe to compete. Did you know that the lower school was in Heb Hall and their playground was on the hill that leads to Chapel Valley? Also, Albert Hall, which is where our classroom is now, was used for the upper school classes. Sanford does a lot of plays but in the 70s only a few plays were done. These are the plays: The Wizard of Oz, Your Good Man Charlie Brown, and The Sound of Music. Each class had about 13 kids. In 1974 and 1975, 15 teachers and staff lived on campus. This is really fun. There was donkey basketball. Donkey basketball is when players get on donkeys and play basketball. Last fact, on May Day there was a bike parade where whoever had the best looking bike won. Every grade did something with music for May Day too. Third grade was in charge of the maypole and dance. The 70s are really interesting in Sanford, and I think you should research more on them.
There are many important dates of the 1980s. Sanford celebrated its 50th anniversary in 1980. In 1981, Sanford takes itself into a day school and only had a few boarders who were left. After those students graduated, there were no more boarders. In 1981, the chapel in Chapel Valley was renovated. In 1982, Miss Pasala taught science and reading. In 1984, Sanford sold the land to make Sanford Ridge. In the winter of 1988, all the horses left campus. In 1989, the tornado struck campus in early evening of June 9th. There were buildings destroyed by the tornado and many trees are down. They built fields in Chapel Valley during this decade too.
On a pretty summer day in June 1989, a tornado hit Sanford School. That night, the sky grew green and black, and the tornado ripped through campus and after Jim flew across Newport Gap Pike. Only one wall was left standing, and it was the wall with the athletic banners. When he looked around, it looked like total destruction. But the smell in the air smelled so nice because of the fresh pine scent from the 200 pine trees that were uprooted. No one was allowed on campus until it was safe, due to the down power lines. On Sunday, the Sanford community gathered outside of the fence, surrounding the school with tears in their eyes. It was a miracle no one was hurt.
what campus was This is what campus life was like in the 1980s. There were no horses on campus by the end of the decade because they left in 1988. Until that time, there were horseback riding lessons for students in 5th grade and older. There were no dorms on campus either. There wasn't a chicken coop on campus like there was when Sanford was a farm. The kids were not dressed the same, so there were no uniforms. There were not as many children back then. In the 1980s, Sanford was a day school, but had a couple of boarders left. They were finishing high school. Traffic went both ways on our road there through campus. The buildings and the classrooms were not the same then as they are now. There was a May Fair and art show in the spring. There were buses for day students. There were apple orchards on campus.
This part is about the head of school, teachers, and staff and faculty members that were honored during the 80s. The head of school is Mr. Schofield, the head of lower school was Peter Pelosi, and the head of upper school was Doug Woods. In 1980, Mrs. Perkins was a cheerleading coach and a middle school teacher. In 1981, Mr. Humphreys came to work at Sanford. He was an English teacher in the middle school. In 1982, Mrs. Pizzala started here and taught science. In 1983, Mrs. Stafford started working here and helped with the horseback riding program. In 1984, Mrs. McGregor started teaching kindergarten. In 1989, Mrs. Samoninski started as a PE teacher. Lastly, the 1988 yearbook was dedicated to Mr. and Mrs. Donchenes for their kind and caring support. They were both Sanford teachers.
In the 1990s, many things happened. In 1990, the Sports Center was finished. It took the place of Appleby Gym that was destroyed by the tornado. In 1991, Miss Moore came to Sanford to teach and to substitute. Now she is our Latin teacher. In 1995, there were about 675 kids on campus. The 1997 yearbook was dedicated to Mr. Lubna for being a great art teacher. A ton of buildings were built in the 1990s. The gym was finished, as I mentioned. A middle school library and a computer lab were added. The pond was cleaned out and restored by the class of 1994. The pond was named after Cab Calloway, a great jazz musician. Cab Calloway's grandson graduated from Sanford. Extended days started in shared space with the nurse's office. This building was built and located near the walkway to the Sports Center.
Campus life in the 1990s was awesome. In the 1990s, the students did not wear uniforms except for sports. For field hockey, the girls wore kilts, a kind of skirt with a plaid pattern. The school colors were blue and gold. The horses that roamed where Sanford Ridges now are gone. There was $100,000 worth of damage from the tornado. The loss of trees and the amount of damage to buildings were devastating. They built a new gym which opened in the fall of 1990. Chocolate economics began in the 90s. It was a brand new unit for third graders. All school field trips were canceled because of the Iraq War. One of the clubs that Sanford had was the art club. In the art club, students sketched, drew, colored, and painted.
There were a lot of amazing people who worked at Sanford in the 1990s. There were 3 heads of school in the 1990s. Gordon Schofield continues as head in the early 1990s. Then Krista Cairns was head from 1992 to 1998. Chip McLean came in 1998 and was head for 13 years. The head of lower school was Mrs. Henry. There are some teachers who are still here. Miss Helmecki and Miss Hutch teach PE and health. Miss Bernanke teaches second grade along with Miss Kelsey. Miss Silverman teaches art. Mr. Waterman is the boys' basketball coach. Miss Gonzala and Miss Diabolito teach third grade. Miss Humphreys is the counselor. Some teachers were on here before the 1990s and still are. It has been a long time that Mrs. Moore has taught Latin. Some staff members who were honored during this decade are Mr. Ruinoff was honored in the yearbook and was a caring art teacher. Mr. Humphreys became head of the middle school in 1990.
Sanford has some amazing history in the 1990s. There are a lot of awesome and cool facts about our school. Sanford had Greek dances. Must have been fun to dress up and dance like they did back in Greece. The 5th grade wax museum started in the 1990s and we still have it now. All of the first graders took violin as part of their day. Wow, that's a lot of music. Sanford has some talent to put on the Wizard of Oz play. Pumpkin was created by Mr. Dagny in the 1990s. Wow, that's awesome. The tornado cleanup was huge. The biggest mess ever on campus. 250 evergreen trees were down, and it smelled like Christmas. Sanford had some terrific events in the 1990s. Sanford started doing Founders Day. Founders Day is when we celebrate Sanford's birthday. The girls won the state championship in Sanford's basketball team. The girls' sports were field hockey, volleyball, lacrosse, swimming, and tennis. I hope you enjoyed all these facts about the 90s out there.
Okay.
You want to learn about some important dates and buildings? Sanford started a $1 million campaign to improve our buildings on campus in the early 2000s. With that money, we were able to rebuild Stephen May Hall, the building we are in right now. In 2004, Albright Hall and Yearsley Hall were remodeled and reopened. Albright Hall is where a third grade classroom is located. In 2004, Miss McGregor started teaching kindergarten reading. We added a green roof in the 2000s. Fields remain in Chapel Valley. One is named after Mrs. Pitts. The SunnyHill's Tea was revived in our decade as a final activity to the third grade Sanford History Unit. In 2005, the 75th anniversary was held. There was a big party in the sports center to celebrate. In 2001, we had our first health fair, and in 2002, we had the first Empty Bowls project. We were basketball state champions 3 years in a row, 2010, 2011, and 2012.
In the 2000s, life on campus was awesome. Even though it is pretty much the same as it is now, it was great, and it still is amazing now. The many sports that the students played in the beginning of the 2000s were soccer, lacrosse, swimming, tennis, cross country, and basketball. They are all still played now. Students have so much fun playing them. Did you know that Sanford has a pumpkin chunkin team? It continued in the 2000s, and they do it every year at the pumpkin chunkin contest in southern Delaware. There have been 2 heads of school in the 2000s. They were Douglas McKilkin and Mark Anderson. They are both great leaders. Mr. McKilkin retired in 2011 and passed away in 2013. We had a ceremony for him. Mr. Anderson came in the fall of 2011 and is still the head of school now.
Do you want to know who was the head of the lower school and some of the teachers hired in the 2000s? Mr. McKelkin was head of school until Mr. Anderson took over in 2011. Miss Watson started helping Miss Zimmer in our decade. Miss Hebard retired as the head of lower school, and Miss Zimmer started. Miss Bazell started teaching 3rd grade again with Miss Diabaldo. Mr. Wagner was the head of upper school until Ian's mom came, Mrs. Casto. These are the teachers who joined lower school in the 2000s. Mrs. Watson, Mrs. Coker, Mr. Bell, and Mrs. Freeman. These are some faculty members who were honored in our decade. Helen Vermchuk, a beloved upper school English teacher, was honored for being a fantastic teacher, and in her memory they planted a garden in Chapel Valley. In 2014, Miss Diabaldo received the Johns Award for Excellence in Teaching.
Ouch. I heard you show me.
There are so many interesting facts about the 2000s. Did you know that there was a Garmin Club in the 2000s? In the mid-2000s, there were about 700 children who attended Sanford School. In 2002, the boys basketball team won the championship game and won the 2002 trophy. Sanford lifer Dee Sesno was at our school for 15 years. He was killed in the World Trade Center tragedy. Here at Sanford School, we honored him by dedicating the deck outside the dining hall to him. Sanford raised $10 million to improve our campus during this time. Ms. Basala is an awesome teacher and a great runner who helped out with girls on the run last year. She has been here throughout the 2000s.
Thank you for coming today and making our tea so much fun. Please feel free to stay and enjoy some tea and treats. Have a great day.
Your